So welcome one and all to our webinar covering effective self-inspections, sharing some best industry practices. I know many people online. It's nice to be talking, well, gosh, at you, if not with you, so apologies from that point of view. Maybe we can catch up a bit more fully another time. My name is Mike Halliday. I'm the EVP for NSF Health Sciences, Pharma Biotech, based in York in the UK. And put up a scary picture. I've got responsibility for our QP training program and our IRCA Certified Pharmaceutical GMP Auditor training. And we thought it'd be useful to build on some of that background, some of the experience, time in the industry, running audit teams, doing lots of auditing, to actually share what we think of as some useful feedback, some good ideas that have come in from anything. Okay, so over the next 30 minutes or so, we'll go through and share some of these ideas that we've come across, that we met on our training courses, met on audits and inspections, and just see what we can do to share what we consider to be some best practices around and about. We do quite a bit of training, as you know, and in particular around auditor training. Over the past 5 years, we've had 1,000 people going through our certified lead auditor training course. And I'll pick up some aspects as we go through this presentation of one or two of things that we do on that course, which gives some useful feedback to the rest of us. So you'll be able to get some of the benefits of that, and we'll, after the course as well, after this webinar, we'll share some of the outputs from that you might find useful for yourselves also. Well, let's cover over the next 30 minutes some aspects around terminology. Let's clarify what we're talking about. Terminology moves from one company to another, so we'll go through some of that. We'll have a little bit of a talk around time. That's our most valuable resource, see how we can use that. And we'll have a chat around some varying cultures and behaviors. We'll get into some aspects of that. And I'll use Plan, Do, Check and Act, the PDCA cycle, as perhaps the simplest approach to any form of self-inspection process. And we'll build on that model as we go through. So just moving on. Start off by asking ourselves a question. Quick question then, so why do we bother to perform these audits and self-inspections? It takes up a lot of resource, it's time commitment, hopefully we're going to do it for a benefit. Now, any good quality management system, regardless of the industry you're working in, is going to drive us to carry out self-inspections to confirm that our systems, our quality management system, is actually working well. However, in our industry, there's an added benefit. And we know in our industry our end consumer, our end customer, has another name as well. They're often the patient, as well as the other stakeholders involved in our industry at the end of the process as a patient. And the great thing for us as internal auditors, as self-inspectors, is that we're having a key role in protecting the patient. And it's no surprise that by protecting that end consumer, that end customer, that patient, that we're also protecting our business. However, when we think specifically about the benefits for that self-inspector, that internal auditor, I think there's a great driver, and that is driving continuous improvement. That's really the key goal that we can get out of these self-inspection exercises. Now, yes, the GMPs, and it's no surprise then that UDRELEX PICS guide enforces the need for self-inspections. The GMP legislation, 2003-94, and Chapter 9 of the GMP guide does talk about the need to carry out self-inspections. And it's probably only fairly recently, since we've had the Falsified Medicines Directive, that the emphasis has extended outwards as much as it has historically focused inwards. So yes, we do look at our external supply audits, hugely important to protect our supply chain and therefore our business and our patients. But that focus now around internal audits and self-inspections is still there and is still very valid to us. Let's have a look at some of the terminology we might come across. So you might come across things like regulatory audits and hopefully come across them in a positive way. We will see audits of the site by the site. We'll look at corporate or head office audits and those departmental audits. And of course, we just mentioned those supplier audits where we go out and look at our supply network, our supply chain. Two of those are a bit unusual. The regulatory audit, classically that would be more like a third-party audit. There's a degree of certification, there's a degree of approval around that one. So the regulators come along and if all goes well, we keep our license, we keep our jobs, we keep our bonus, senior management's happy. The last one, supplier audits, well, these are the classical second-party audits. These are audits we do to another company. So we've got the audits that are done to us by the regulators and the audits that we do to other companies through our supply network. And these, of course, the suppliers could be those who supply a product or a service or a contract operation. Those other group, though, the site audits by the site, the corporate audit, and the system or department audits, they are all variations on the theme of self-inspections or internal audits. But actually, in real life, they mean slightly different things. Those site audits by the site, we usually hear those as being the awareness audit. Maybe there's an inspection coming up, so senior management start to walk around the site a bit more often, accompanied by QA, just checking, doing those walk-through hygiene audits, making sure that we're ready for what's going to happen to us. The corporate audit, and I spent many years as a corporate auditor, unfortunately does have with it quite a bit of political pressure. A team of auditors from head office arrive on site, 4 or 5 auditors on site for maybe a week or two, taking the site to bits, looking at every aspect, and often on the back of those audits, decisions are made around product allocation, site development, site closure. So there's a nervous political element around those. On this talk, though, I'd like to focus more about those system or department audits. These are the true audits of self, the real self-inspections. First-party audit by those who know. So these are the people who know where the skeletons are hidden. They know enough about the operation. They know enough about the systems to understand where the worries are. Now, I'm going to focus on these during this short webinar because these are often the most important and critical, and yet so often the ones which are least regarded as important by companies or by certain members in the management teams. And we'll talk about some of that in a second. Not all companies see the importance of those self-inspections, those audits of self. And I've certainly come across companies, contract manufacturing organizations, where they say, we don't even do self-inspections because our customers come along kindly and inspect us maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So therefore, we feel we don't need to. Now, that's a big worry to me. That's a huge worry, and I certainly feel that any company that's getting ready to carry out self-inspections should be using people who understand their own operations and not relying on anyone from outside. And I'm sure any inspector would write up such a company as not meeting the requirements. If we have a look at the allocation of time, say in man days across a year around auditing, we could easily see something. Hang on, get it to swap over. There we go, sorry about that. So we could see something that looks like this. If this triangle represents very crudely the number of man days being allocated to these different audit functions, then those audits of suppliers and contractors are increasingly taking a huge amount of time off-site, looking at operations in our contractors, our suppliers, our service providers. Now ideally, probably in a similar amount of time, maybe even more time, if we add together all of the elements of the self-inspection time, that internal audit time, maybe we've split our internal audit program into a number of 2-hour or half-day sessions, but if we add all that together, then that should represent a significant amount of man time dedicated to this important aspect. Those corporate audits, those teams of people arriving on site and giving you a hard time, that's probably a smaller group, and the walk-through audits by the senior management or self-inspections by the site, Probably less so. Now really, those regulatory inspections should be maybe just one or two inspectors, maybe for a few days, 3 or 4 days. And if we get the balance right, those regulatory inspections should become fairly routine and not as nerve-wracking as they can be. However, some companies, it feels that when we talk to them and see what they're doing, they appear to have inverted this triangle, and they're spending so much time picking up the pieces after poor regulatory inspections or after challenging regulatory inspections. And then the senior management are spending a lot of time walking around and second-guessing everything that's happening, and the corporate teams are coming on site and challenging everything that's being done. That less and less time is actually dedicated to the people who know the details and properly and accurately carry out those self-inspections. And in fact, going back to the ideal triangle we have here, the regulators increasingly will say to us that if they're on site and they find issues around housekeeping, out-of-date SOPs, SOPs not being followed, then as well as the issue that they're finding, they will often write up a separate issue and say, clearly, we've got evidence now that your self-inspection program isn't working. You should have found these things before we did. And that's the importance that the regulatory inspectors are placing on our internal audits, our self-inspections. Now, if we look at these behavioral models I mentioned and see what that means to us, a bit unkindly, I've sort of grouped companies into two elements. We've got the dinosaur approach versus the survivor approach. Now, these are things I've actually heard, things that have been said to me during training classes, during audits, inspections, or working on site with customers. And some of it's quite frightening, really. Perhaps the dinosaur approach around self-inspections, you hear things like, self-inspection's a waste of time. Self-inspection's a tick box exercise. You've got to do it, but don't prep, just turn up. Don't bother with the report, we're not going to read it. No need to follow up, it's just a self-inspection. Or even, perhaps very worryingly, the internal auditors don't know how to audit or what they're auditing. That glamorous auditing is the global corporate supplier auditing. That seems to be where auditors, aspiring auditors, try and get into. They see this as the collecting your air miles type of audit as being the only way to go. Now the survivors, and sometimes in the survivor category, I would put in there companies who you wouldn't automatically think of as being pharmaceutical companies. I was dealing recently with a fast-moving consumer good company, and we were putting together some training classes we were going to take to their internal auditors. And I used the term in our conversations. I said, okay, what should we cover with your internal auditors? And they said, well, let's stop you right there. Because we don't call them internal auditors. We describe them as continuous improvement officers. I was a bit taken aback by that, and I thought, well, that's kind of a nice approach. And that immediately gets over this whole idea of the internal auditor being a policeman who has to turn up on site and give everyone in the organization a hard time and feel that there's some macho element to criticizing colleagues. But what a lovely approach that the self-inspection is about continuous improvement. The self-inspection department's almost a continuous improvement department, and we can use the output from these self-inspections to drive continuous improvement. It's taken seriously. Resources are provided. There's a structure, there's a system. Reports are produced, and reports are worded to drive continuous improvement. Talk about some of that in a few minutes. Auditors are trained, and the follow-up is actually carried out. Frankly, if we dedicate the time and resources to self-inspections, then those feared sort of corporate audits and regulatory inspections become fairly routine and never surprising. Interestingly, in our GMP lead auditor course that we run, I mentioned, we always review and develop a process for auditing. And I think it's a useful exercise you could try with your audit teams as well back in the company, is just to get a flip chart and a load of post-it notes and just say to them, okay, create on that a process flow for carrying out an audit, all of the steps involved in carrying out an audit or a self-inspection. And it's remarkable. We find it on our courses, and I'm sure you'll find it a good discussion point with your auditors as well, to start to consider all of the aspects of an audit. It's very easy to think that an audit's about grabbing a blank pad and a pen and walking into a department, but there's much more to it than that. And very quickly people start to think about the planning, the scheduling, the preparation, the creating of specific tools and templates, and then turning up to carry some of these activities out. And then finally there's the report, which is actually going to make a difference. And on the courses, people often say, well, yes, we do feel that there are more steps than we had considered. And then the next question we ask is, okay, that might be for external audits, but what are the similarities and difference with that compared to our internal or self-inspection program? And after some deliberation, people usually come around to say, well, actually there are more similarities than differences between those audits we do to ourselves and those audits we do to other companies. Not really a surprise when you think about it, but do we actually do it is the question. Let's look at one of the really simple models that we might use for the audit process. You'll recognize that as the ISO-based approach, the plan, do, check, and act to improve, the PDCA cycle. Very simple approach, and it's the relatively straightforward approach to planning and doing our audits. We can use it as a risk-based approach, and we'll talk about some of that. So if we want to plan our audits, we need to create some form of list, a risk-based list of what needs to be GMP audited. Now, there's a useful document out there. Many people are aware of it, some aren't. It's worth Googling around on, the compilation of community procedures on inspections and exchange of information. I'll send you a link to that afterwards. It's quite a useful document. It's not a small document, but it's effectively the European Inspector's SOP on auditing. And in there it's going to talk a lot about scheduling audits, planning audits, using a risk-based approach to think about frequency, duration, number of audits, and whether certain outcomes change those risks. So why shouldn't we in the industry be looking at that as well? Even with our self-inspections, there's some valuable hints and tips in there. So yes, we're going to have to create a plan for the audits that we're going to carry out in our self-inspection program. Now, a good question that we can ask ourselves when we're putting that plan together is, well, how's it going to be structured? And clearly we want to cover all aspects of our site. We're going to look at all of the operations, the processes, and of course all of the elements of the quality management system that need to be audited as well, not forgetting the audit program and the self-inspection program as part of that assessment. So we're going to look at all of those aspects, breaking it down into what we can carry out in perhaps 2 hours, half a day chunks. Start thinking about the resource implications, the allocation of people, the expertise that we're going to put into that program, the training, development opportunities for new auditors. All of that starts to build up into a really useful program. If in doubt, a good question is to ask, what doesn't have an impact on GMP? Now, when I ask that question, sometimes people put their hand up and say, well, it's HR. HR obviously has no impact on GMP. And then you think about it and say, well, really? That's the group who hire everyone who comes into our factory, often the group responsible for coordinating our training activities on site, our GMP training. Do they have an impact on GMP? Clearly. Are they as critical as, say, a sterile manufacturing department? Maybe not. So maybe we'll audit those guys in HR every 2 years, maybe the sterile facility every 3 months. So by setting our schedules, our programs for carrying out these audits, we can start to demonstrate a risk-based approach. And obviously, once we've created our programs, we're then able to make sure we've got our commitments in terms of resources, standby resources to make sure we can then keep on target. So that's a lot around the planning side. If we look at the actual doing side, sort of preparation to do these audits, really useful to start to build up a number of processes, aid memoirs, templates, to drive a consistent approach and structure to the processes. Auditors are all going to audit in slightly different ways, but we want to make sure that they're not missing important aspects. And a good way of driving that is by preparing some documents in advance of the audit, perhaps sharing these across the audit teams, so there's an opportunity to do and review audit by audit and see how we can improve some of these templates and devices. Now, obviously we talked about preparing those aid memoirs. Another key aspect is to train the auditors. I mentioned that earlier on, but there are two particular aspects to training these internal auditors. One is around the interpersonal skills. It's a huge challenge for the internal auditor. If they're going to do a good job, they have to be able to interview colleagues, knowing that tomorrow they'll be working together, perhaps not as auditor and auditee, but just as work colleagues. So being able to influence, being able to ask questions, be able to listen to answers, be able to take notes, really useful skills when thinking about influencing and questioning colleagues. So those interpersonal skills, really challenging aspect for those internal auditors. We need to think about how we can support them in the process we're asking them to carry out. I've certainly heard internal auditors telling me that they've gone into manufacturing areas and they've come out in tears because of the way the audit went. They were bullied into not reporting observations. So there are some issues around there that we need to address up front and make sure we're taking those and sorting them out. Then there's the technical training. Yes, there's a technical training all around how to carry out an audit, all those elements and steps you were just looking at. But then there are also the processes and systems that they will be auditing. Are they fully aware of the processes? Are they fully aware of the processes within each of the quality management system elements? Are they trained on aspects of report writing? And we are expecting these internal auditors to audit against the standard, so we have to make sure that they're up to date with the standard. Can we demonstrate that they've had regular and recent GMP training so they're up to date with the legislation and the guidelines? And of course, on top of the basic standards of the guidelines, we may have some additional corporate standards, and we have to ensure that they're being complied with as well. We can easily get into very specific areas with our internal auditors, and we can be looking at the 5 Ps perhaps, or we can be looking at data integrity around the Alcoa aspects. So we need to make sure that their focus is current and relevant to give us most value adding for protecting our patients and protecting our business. One aspect of this is worth a little bit of an extra sidetrack, really. How often do we hear a criticism made of internal audits saying, well, we get too familiar, we go blind to what we're looking at, we stop looking, we stop observing. Or to swing it round the other way, we hear, oh, well, that's the value of a fresh pair of eyes. Or when we find something, we say, well, do you know what? I've walked past that for days and I didn't notice it. Yeah, like a missing ceiling tile. You know, I've walked past it for days and I just didn't notice it was there. Selective vision is something we're all guilty of, even auditors who are recruited and trained around their observational skills. But we can work on that. We can correct this by encouraging our auditors, our self-inspectors, to use structured observational auditing. Approach every room, every department or facility in the same way. And encourage the auditors not to be rushed through what they're trying to do, but to take the time to stop and look and think. And I would always use this approach, where top down, it's nice and easy, you're not going to forget anything too much. Ceilings, walls, floors, joins, covings. What about movement of services? Sort of HVAC, air, steam, gases. How do they come into the room? How do they get out of the room? What do things look like? Understand the process. What are the key steps? What's monitored? What's controlled? What's the impact of something going wrong with one of those steps? And now what we've done basically is bring elements of an HACCP approach to an auditor who can carry this out standing on his feet, working as he goes through the audit process itself. Look at the flow of material, the flow of people, and there's a wonderful opportunity these days to use photography. Now, it's a real challenge to try and take photographs in a contract manufacturing organization, but surely in our own sites, if it's a self-inspection of our own site, an internal audit, surely we can use photography there. It's going to save us so much time in writing down huge descriptive reports. It's going to give us evidence which instantly quantifies what it is we're looking at, and it's going to give us proof then that the corrective actions have actually taken place. So I can't emphasize enough, I think, the value of photography to those internal self-inspectors. Then we're going to write reports. Question, are reports seen at a senior enough level within the organization? All too often, all that hard work, all those days and days of man hours that go into producing these self-inspections are buried because they don't go high enough up the food chain for senior management to actually get involved. Hopefully that's not the case in your organizations. It really is a key resource. This is one of the key areas that will enable those senior managers to rest easy, to sleep at night, and to know that the operation's under control. So try and make sure that these are seen at a senior enough level. Now, there's two approaches to writing audit observations, and I would suggest the second of these two. The first approach, and I've certainly seen audit reports, I've probably written audit reports which looked like this in the past, which were along the lines of, there was a great deal of white powder along the floor of the compression suite corridor. So the auditee receives that, and they grab a vacuum cleaner or they grab a broom, they sweep up, kappa, job done. Not at all. Will it be there tomorrow? Yes. Have you actually stopped it from coming back? Not really. However, if we looked at the system that was behind that, and the auditors were encouraged to challenge the systems rather than just the evidence that they were seeing, perhaps it could be a different matter. So, for example, if we change that to the second wording of the similar situation, the facilities management and cleaning system is deficient with the potential for cross-contamination. It was noted that there was a visible layer of white powder in the compression suite corridor as per the attached photograph. The expectation is that systems are provided to ensure that product dusts and residues are contained or removed and not transferred to a common corridor handling other materials and at a positive pressure to the room it serves. Kappa, well, the kappa from that's going to be fairly huge, isn't it? We'll be looking at HVAC systems, we'll be looking at dust containment within equipment and processes and operations. So we can start to really identify the risks, the root causes, and making genuine improvements. So that systems approach to auditing, especially with those internal audits, can really start to drive us some useful improvement kappas. And I'll have a look at that. I think it's very useful. We're then moving on from the doing the audits to checking the audits. So are the audits being carried out according to the program, to the schedule which derives from that program we established? Are we trending observations to look at auditor performance and also common themes, training requirements, improvement requirements across the site? Have we got QP awareness of these audits that are being carried out? Obviously, Annex 16 is driving the QP to be aware of all audits, all auditing activities that are being carried out. So really valuable for the QP to show an awareness of what's happening on his site. These are going to be the best error signals, the most valuable error signals that the QP is going to have access to. Really valuable. What about those CAPA follow-ups? Are we really driving them to root cause and coming up with some good solutions? If our self-inspection system is working, lots of benefits come out of that. We meet our risk-based commitments, we generate improvements to systems, we protect our patients, business, and the QP, the QA, the management confidence builds in the site and the operations. Not just our management as well, but the regulators have an easier time. Our audit risk history gets better. And therefore, according to that compilation of community procedures guide, they will spend less focus on our sites because they know we're doing a good job of finding these problems ourselves. So it really does get to a good win-win position. Okay, so act, plan, do, check and act. Acting to improve. What can we do to improve our self-inspection process? We can train the auditors. That's always a good idea. These guys should be experts in auditing, experts in GMP. They should have regular auditor review meetings to share best practice, trend results, sharing hot topics, keeping up to date. Maybe carrying out witness audits by the QP to make sure that they're happy with the quality, the standards being performed. Giving feedback to the auditors from other stakeholders just to show the value of the activities they're carrying out. Maybe even drag them kicking and screaming off-site so that they can see our audits of our other suppliers, or send them out to carry out these audits in their own right. That way they can see how other companies perform certain activities. Make the internal auditor a recognized professional in the audit process. Now, finally, I'd just like to mention to you a little exercise that we can carry out, and hopefully you'll find it useful. On our lead auditor course, we go through a reflection process with the people on the course about their audit system. And we benchmark and give people some feedback on this. And I thought it might be valuable to you guys to do something similar. Now, the approach is fairly simple. It's 12 topic headings, and underneath each of those topic headings there are half a dozen or 10 questions or facts or statements which enable you to assess that particular aspect of the audit system. Now, after this webinar, we're going to send on to you a cut-down version of that, a simplified version just to have a play with and have a look at. When you're looking at each of these headings and the key points described, you've got a chance then to score on a score sheet like the one I'm displaying, scoring of 1 to 10. So if you think your company is absolutely excellent at some of these areas, you might want to score that a 9 or a 10. If you think it's not very strong or fairly deficient, there'll be a 1 or 2. Somewhere in the middle, try and score it sort of 3, 4, or 6, 7. Suggest you don't go for the 5. 5 is fence sitting. Sitting on fences can get a bit painful, so try and force yourself to jump one way or the other. Once you've got that done, have a look at it, have a play with it, maybe see about changing some of the particular questions in there to make them more relevant to your company, and then maybe get your internal auditors to go through the same exercise. Pool all of their feedback, their results into that, and that will give you quite a good, quick, easy review of your audit, your self-inspection audit system. That will pick out some strengths, and that will pick out some areas to focus on. I would suggest then that every 6, 9, 12 months you go through the exercise again and just reevaluate. Are you actually improving those weaknesses? Are you turning those weaknesses into strengths? It's a useful tool, and I'd recommend having a go with it. Anything we do to hold up a mirror moment, is really valuable to us in our industry. If after this webinar we send that on to you, if you carry out that exercise, if you get some colleagues to fill it in and you want some feedback on any suggestions from what you've created or what you've discovered, just email it through to me. I'd be very happy to have a one-to-one discussion with you on what that might show or what you could do about it. Similarly, at the end of the webinar, if you have any questions on any of the stuff we've covered, then please do email them through to me. I'll give you some contact details on this, and we'll be in touch with everyone who's on the webinar at the moment. and let you have some contact details so you can fire any questions back to me. What the results might look like, the sort of things that we're seeing when we carry this out with over 1,000 people out in the industry. Well, here's a little bit of a summary of some of the things that we've seen. Good news is that over the years we've been carrying out this survey, things appear to be getting better. However, at one level you can see the green bars there, sort of dark green, light green, basically saying that GMP, great mounds of paper, if it's anything to do with writing procedures, writing documents, we're pretty good at that. In our industry, we tend to be fairly good at the documentation side of things. However, the weak areas, the areas where we have a bit of an embarrassment, would be around things like monitoring performance or feedback and follow-up from our internal audits. Training as a red bar area, or really worryingly, use of the audit data. So we're doing all of this good audit work, we're finding these issues, but in many companies we're not actually using that data to drive improvement. It becomes back to being a tick box exercise. So if you carry that exercise out by yourselves, use it. It's a useful tool. It's a reflection time. Very, very happy to help you interpret the data you're getting out of that. If you want to ping me emails afterwards, it'd be interesting to see what you come up with. I hope it'll be useful to you. Just to keep in contact, I'll make sure you all get my contact details. But thank you very much for your time today. If you have specific questions or follow-up, then please email me. I'll get back to you. Have a go at that assessment exercise, and I'll send you some links to some of those other useful documents. Get your internal auditors to try it, see how they assess themselves, what are the areas for improvement. And best of luck, and enjoy that continuous improvement activity. And I hope it helps you all sleep better at nights when you know that this good stuff is actually happening. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll end the meeting at that point. We'll be in touch and tell you about other webinars in our series, and I hope you continue to find them useful. Thank you very much indeed. Bye for now, everyone.